The silence, long and profound, has finally been shattered. In the hushed corridors of power where Republican politics are forged, a series of deliberate, calculated statements have landed with the force of detonations, revealing deep fissures within the party's foundation. For years, a tense quiet has surrounded the legal and electoral fortunes of Donald J. Trump, a quiet enforced by political necessity and fear of his fervent base. That era of strategic muteness is now over, replaced by a startling and public chorus of concern from the party's most established figures, suggesting an internal reckoning of unprecedented scale is underway. This is not the chatter of never-Trump commentators on cable news, but the grave pronouncements of former cabinet secretaries, retired congressional leaders, and major donors who once formed the bedrock of his support. Their unified message, delivered not in private whispers but through prepared interviews and op-eds, is a clear signal. The dam of unified support is cracking under the weight of accumulating controversies. The immediate catalyst is a confluence of events that has shifted the political calculus from a distant worry to an imminent crisis. A New York jury's recent guilty verdict on multiple felony counts, while subject to appeal, has provided a tangible historical marker, a first for a former American president. Simultaneously, a cascade of concerning polls from critical swing states shows a consistent, troubling pattern for Republicans down the ballot, suggesting Trump's presence at the top of the ticket may be an anchor rather than an engine. Furthermore, his behavior in the wake of these setbacks, characterized by increasingly vehement rhetoric and attacks on the judiciary, has alarmed institutionalists who see it as a threat to both electoral viability and democratic norms. This potent mixture of legal jeopardy, electoral vulnerability, and perceived instability has forced a moment of brutal pragmatism. The party's elder statesmen, sources within several leadership packs confirm, are no longer willing to watch passively as what they see as an avoidable catastrophe unfolds. To understand the seismic nature of this rupture, one must revisit the post-2020 landscape. Following the January 6th Capitol riot, a brief flurry of condemnation from figures like Senator Mitch McConnell and then House Leader Kevin McCarthy gave way to a rapid and almost total reconciliation. Political survival dictated a return to the fold as Trump's grip on the primary electorate proved unshakable. The 2022 midterms, which delivered an underwhelming Republican performance many attributed to poor candidate quality in Trump's shadow, provided the first major data point for internal dissent. Yet, even then, public criticism was muted and carefully couched. The party apparatus, from the Republican National Committee down to state committees, largely fell into line behind his 2024 bid, clearing the field of all but marginal opposition. This was interpreted as a sign of his invincibility within the party, a testament to a base that views any legal action as illegitimate persecution. That unified front, however, was always more facade than fortress. Beneath the surface, a profound anxiety simmered among the party's donor class, its foreign policy hands, and its pragmatic campaign operatives. Their concerns were twofold: electoral and existential. Privately, veteran strategists expressed fears that Trump's unique polarizing nature would suppress moderate Republican turnout while energizing the Democratic base, a disastrous combination in swing states. Furthermore, a faction of the party, often called the Old Guard, harbored deep unease about the long-term transformation of the GOP into a vehicle for personal grievance over coherent policy. These tensions were managed, not resolved, through a transactional understanding. Trump delivered a loyal voter base, and the establishment provided logistical and financial support. This uneasy truce has now been shattered by the cold, hard numbers of recent polling and the irreversible fact of a criminal conviction. The historical parallel, often whispered in Washington think tanks, is to the final days of the Nixon presidency. Then, as now, a beleaguered president faced a crescendo of legal and political challenges. The decisive moment came not from Democrats, but from a delegation of senior Republican senators who visited the White House to deliver a stark message. His support in Congress had collapsed. That intervention was the catalyst for resignation. While the current situation differs vastly in context and mechanism, the dynamic of intra-party intervention is a recurring theme in political crises. What makes the present moment distinct is that Trump is not the sitting president and thus cannot be forced from office by his own party. The leverage points are different, centered on nomination mechanics, campaign funding, and public persuasion, making the current statements from GOP heavyweights a form of political pressure without direct constitutional precedent. The architecture of Trump's post-presidential influence rests on three pillars: an unwavering base often estimated at 30 to 40% of the Republican electorate, a disciplined network of media allies that amplifies his message and attacks his critics, and a perceived invincibility in primary contests. This trifecta has cowed potential rivals for years. The base provides the votes, the media ecosystem shields him from damaging narratives, and the primary dominance discourages establishment challenges. The recent condemnations strike at the perceived invulnerability of this third pillar. By publicly questioning his viability, figures like former Vice President Mike Pence, former Attorney General Bill Barr, and numerous retired senators are providing rhetorical cover for others to do the same. They are attempting to redefine political courage within the party, suggesting that loyalty to the party's long-term health must now supersede loyalty to a single individual. Financial pressure represents another critical front in this quiet uprising. Major institutional donors, including some of the wealthiest families in American conservative politics, are reportedly reevaluating their commitment. Conversations with fundraisers connected to three major donor networks reveal a growing sentiment that resources should be diverted to secure congressional majorities in state houses rather than funneled into a presidential campaign they fear is already faltering. This is not a blanket boycott, but a strategic reallocation. The priority is holding the House and flipping the Senate, one bundler stated on condition of anonymity. Writing a check to a campaign that might drag everyone down is seen as poor stewardship. This calculus, if it spreads, could severely constrain the Trump campaign's ability to compete in the advertising battlegrounds of key states come autumn. Internationally, the reverberations of this GOP discord are being watched with intense scrutiny. Allies and adversaries alike are recalibrating their assessments of American political stability. For European partners already uneasy about the possibility of a second Trump term, the sight of prominent Republicans breaking ranks introduces a new variable: potential internal constraints on a Trump administration. Conversely, autocratic leaders who have previously expressed admiration for Trump may interpret the internal opposition as evidence of a deep state or establishment resistance, potentially emboldening their own narratives. The global financial markets, which prefer predictability, are viewing the increased political volatility with caution, analysts at several international banks note, as it compounds existing uncertainties around monetary policy and trade. The Democratic response to this Republican fissure has been characteristically cautious and deliberate. Publicly, officials from the Biden campaign and the Democratic National Committee maintain a disciplined focus on their own message, wary of appearing to meddle in GOP affairs or prematurely celebrating discord. Privately, however, strategists acknowledge this development as a significant opportunity. It validates their core argument that Trump is a uniquely flawed and dangerous candidate, an argument now being echoed, however partially, from within the opposing party. This allows Democratic campaigns at all levels to frame the election not as a typical partisan battle, but as a broad coalition to defend democratic norms, a message they believe resonates with independent and suburban voters who will decide the election. Within the Trump campaign and its immediate orbit, the reaction to the criticism has been one of defiant dismissal and counterattack. Advisors have characterized the former officials speaking out as disgruntled relics and voices from a failed past, seeking to frame the conflict as one between a populist movement and a rejected establishment. This playbook has worked effectively in the past, solidifying his support among voters who distrust institutional power. The campaign's strategy appears to be to leverage the criticism to reinforce Trump's core narrative of being an outsider persecuted by all corners of the political elite. However, insiders suggest there is acute awareness that the donor class cannot be alienated entirely, leading to a more targeted response aimed at soothing specific financial anxieties while publicly projecting unshakable strength. The legal dimension adds an inescapable layer of complexity that no amount of political spin can fully neutralize. Sentencing in the New York case looms, while 3 other major criminal prosecutions, 2 federal and 1 in Georgia, wound through the courts. The timing of these proceedings, particularly the federal case concerning the handling of classified documents, remains uncertain but carries the potential for pre-election developments that could further destabilize the campaign. Legal analysts note that the judicial process operates on a timeline entirely separate from the electoral calendar, creating a persistent cloud of uncertainty. This legal overhang directly fuels the concerns of the GOP critics, who argue the party is foolishly nominating a candidate who may be spending crucial campaign days in a courtroom or facing a sentencing hearing. The demand for immediate action hinted at in the growing chorus of criticism remains deliberately vague, a reflection of the limited concrete tools available to party elites. The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee next month represents the final formal procedural hurdle before Trump becomes the official nominee. While a dramatic convention floor revolt is considered highly unlikely by insiders due to the binding nature of pledged delegates, pressure is mounting behind the scenes for a substantive shift in campaign strategy and tone. What these heavyweights are ultimately demanding, according to those familiar with the discussions, is a de facto intervention, the sidelining of certain incendiary advisors, a disciplined focus on economic messaging, and a public commitment to respect electoral and legal processes. They seek not to replace him, but to contain what they see as his most self-destructive impulses. This internal conflict exposes a fundamental philosophical schism that has plagued the Republican Party since 2016. Is it a party of conservative ideology and institutional respect, or a vehicle for a populist, personality-driven movement? The heavyweights breaking silence represent the former tradition, one that values policy coherence, international alliances, and the decorum of governance. The Trump movement, in contrast, prioritizes disruption, nationalist rhetoric, and a confrontational approach to perceived enemies. For 8 years, the party apparatus has attempted to serve both masters, an increasingly untenable position. The current crisis suggests that the temporary fusion of these two forces is unraveling under the stress of a high-stakes election, where defeat appears not just possible, but probable to a significant segment of the party's own leadership. The impact on down-ballot races cannot be overstated. Republican candidates in competitive House and Senate districts, particularly in suburban areas, are now grappling with a strategic dilemma of immense proportions. Do they tie themselves tightly to Trump, hoping to turn out his base, or do they create distance to appeal to swing voters repelled by him? The public airing of elite GOP doubts makes the latter path more feasible. Several candidates in private calls with party strategists have already inquired about accessing campaign materials that focus on local issues without featuring the presidential nominee prominently. This decoupling strategy, while risky, is seen as a potential survival mechanism in districts Biden won in 2020. The role of conservative media, traditionally a steadfast amplifier for Trump, shows nascent signs of fracture as well. While outlets like Fox News' primetime lineup remain largely supportive, voices on influential editorial pages, such as the Wall Street Journal, and segments on more policy-oriented cable shows have begun to platform the concerns of the party's dissenting elders. This creates a new information environment for Republican voters, where the unified message of persecution and inevitability is no longer absolute. It introduces a sliver of doubt, a permission structure for voters to consider alternatives, however limited those may be at this late stage. This shift, while subtle, is critical in a media ecosystem that has been largely monolithic in its protection of Trump from internal criticism. Looking abroad for comparative analysis, political scientists point to other nations where dominant parties have faced the dilemma of a charismatic but damaging leader. In the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party's long agony over Brexit and the leadership of Boris Johnson provides a recent parallel. A party torn between populist energy and traditional governance, ultimately leading to electoral collapse. The key difference, experts note, is the American primary system, which empowers a party's base over its establishment, making a mid-course correction exceptionally difficult. The current moment in the GOP may be less a British-style coup and more a desperate public plea for behavioral change from a nominee they are stuck with, a scenario with fewer modern precedents. The psychological dimension of Trump's support complicates any purely analytical political response. For millions of voters, his identity is fused with their own sense of political and cultural grievance. Criticisms from establishment figures, therefore, are not seen as valid political arguments, but as affirmations of the very witch hunt narrative he promotes. This creates a perverse effect where internal party criticism may actually harden the support of his core followers, making them more defiant and less likely to abandon him even in the face of electoral headwinds. The GOP critics are thus walking a tightrope, hoping to sway undecided Republicans and independents without triggering a backlash that further enrages the base and makes general election outreach impossible. The coming weeks will serve as a critical testing ground for the potency of this internal rebellion. All eyes will be on the fundraising numbers for the Trump campaign and the congressional GOP committees for the second quarter. A significant divergence with Senate and House committees outpacing the presidential effort will be the clearest empirical evidence that donor priorities have shifted. Furthermore, the tone and content of the Republican National Convention will be meticulously analyzed. Should the programming focus relentlessly on Trump's personal grievances, it will signal a rejection of the critics' demands. A convention that emphasizes broader party unity and policy while still nominating him would indicate a partial concession to the internal pressure. Scenario planning within both political parties now includes a wider range of possibilities. The most likely scenario, still, is that Trump remains the nominee and the party rallies around him, however uneasily, for the final campaign stretch. However, the probability of alternate scenarios has undeniably increased. These include the potential for a significant third-party or independent conservative candidacy funded by disaffected donors, though the logistical deadlines for such an effort are daunting. Another scenario involves a catastrophic further legal or health event that forces Trump's withdrawal, triggering a chaotic brokered convention. While still a long shot, the mere fact that such possibilities are being discussed in serious terms by party elders marks a dramatic shift from the air of inevitability that surrounded the nomination just months ago. The stakes of this internal Republican struggle extend far beyond the 2024 election. They touch upon the very nature of American political leadership and party responsibility. The heavyweights breaking their silence are, in essence, arguing for a return to a form of gatekeeping, where experience, electability, and adherence to democratic norms are criteria for leadership. The Trump movement rejects those gates entirely. The outcome of this conflict will determine the ideological and tactical direction of the Republican Party for a generation. Should Trump win in November, despite the warnings, the critics will be permanently marginalized and the party fully transformed. Should he lose, a civil war for the soul of the party will commence immediately, with these now vocal critics seeking to reclaim lost ground. For the international community, the implications are profound. A United States embroiled in deep public political fratricide is a less predictable and potentially less engaged global actor. Allies in Europe and Asia are quietly developing contingency plans for a range of administrative outcomes, from a fully empowered Trump second term to a weakened presidency facing intense domestic opposition. The spectacle of a major political party in open conflict over its standard-bearer so close to an election undermines the image of American stability that has been a cornerstone of the post-war international order, regardless of which party holds power. This perception of dysfunction carries its own diplomatic and economic costs. In the final analysis, the breaking of silence by GOP heavyweights is a testament to the raw power of political fear. It is not primarily motivated by moral outrage or constitutional principle, though those elements are present for some. It is driven by the cold, calculating fear of a historic defeat that could cede control of all branches of government to Democrats and relegate the Republican Party to a long-term minority status. They have calculated that the risk of speaking out, the fury of the base, the censure from Trump, is now lesser than the risk of staying silent. This is a pragmatic, perhaps last-ditch intervention by a wing of the party that believes it has more to lose from a shipwreck than from a mutiny. As the campaign moves into its most intense phase, the American electorate is presented with a spectacle of rare political transparency. The normally monolithic facade of a major party has cracked, allowing a view into the fierce debates and profound anxieties that usually remain behind closed doors. This does not simplify the voter's choice, but rather complicates it, layering partisan loyalty with questions of party health and national stability. The immediate action demanded may remain unspecified and unrealized in any formal sense. Yet the very act of demanding it has already altered the political landscape, transforming the 2024 election from a straightforward partisan clash into a referendum on the future of one of America's two great political institutions amidst a storm of its own making.